Look closely at this. Don't rush. Let it develop, like an old photograph in a tray of developer. This is not just a moment from the Chronicles. This is a cross-section, an autopsy, exposing the nerve endings of two colliding eras. On the perfectly manicured lawn of Windsor, two worlds met, and one of them did not yet realize it had suffered a mortal wound. On the left is Charles, and at that time still a prince, a man whose entire life is a function, and whose body is the property of the crown. His movements are calibrated by centuries of ritual, his smile a part of the protocol uniform. He is the living embodiment of 1,000 years of history, of rules created to draw an invisible line between the sacred and the profane, between the monarchy and common mortals. His main strength lies in distance, not the physical distance ensured by guards, but the symbolic one. He is not to be touched, not because it is physically dangerous, but because it is unthinkable, a violation of the natural order of things, akin to trying to adjust an angel's wing on a fresco. Touch reduces the symbol to mere flesh. And on the right is Donald Trump, a man for whom the world is not a temple, but a negotiation room, a universe where nothing is sacred except the deal itself, and the primary currency is dominance. He does not see an heir to the throne before him. He sees a partner, an opponent, a piece on the board. And his deep-seated instinct, honed in the real estate battles of New York, dictates one thing to him: establish control, show who's on charge. And this must be done not with words, but with a gesture understood in any human pack. A touch, but not a handshake which symbolizes equality. It is a pat on the back, a gesture of a patron, the gesture of a boss encouraging a subordinate. A gesture that asserts a right of ownership. In this short, almost mundane movement of the hand lies the entire philosophy of a new world crashing down upon the old. Trump doesn't just break etiquette. He annuls it. He declares it irrelevant. He looks at the 1,000-year-old construct of the British monarchy and seems to say, "Interesting, antique. But I am reality. My hand, and I will now touch your symbol to demonstrate to everyone that it's just a man in a suit." And so his hand descends onto Charles's back. At that moment, the cameras capture not a breach of protocol. They capture an act of symbolic dissection, which revealed that behind the facade, there was nothing left. The world where unwritten rules carried weight had been shaken, and the world where only naked power carries weight had just put on a vivid demonstration. Charles smiles. He must smile. That is his function and his curse. Inside, perhaps, he is recoiling in humiliation. His ancestors would have had a man beheaded for less, but he can only save face, because his power is an illusion, and that illusion has just been crudely tested for its durability. He is the curator of a museum, and Trump is a visitor who ignored the "do not touch" sign. And the most alarming thing in this frame is not the touch itself. It is the realization that the guardsman in the bearskin hat, standing nearby, is no longer protecting a sacred figure. He is guarding a void. Let's consider this gesture not as a mistake, but as a technology. What is royal protocol? It is not just a collection of old-fashioned rules. It is an operating system of power based on symbols. Every line of its code was written in memory of some historical threat. The prohibition on touch is one of the key elements of this code. Originally, it was tied to the idea of the monarch's sacred body, of God's anointed, whose touch, conversely, was said to heal. The king's body did not belong to him. It was the nation's asset. To encroach upon it was to encroach upon the divine order. Later, as this belief faded, The protocol began to serve another psychological function, creating distance. Power always surrounds itself with a void to appear more significant. The farther away an object is, the more weight it seems to have. Protocol is that invisible wall that communicates, we are not you, we are different. By touching Charles, Trump is not merely committing a violation. He is conducting a kind of pen test, a check of the system's vulnerabilities. And he discovers that there is no firewall. His gesture is a nonverbal message, addressed not so much to Charles as to the millions of his own voters. He is telling them, there is no distance. There is no sacredness. These are just people who inherited their palaces, while I built mine myself. Their rules are nonsense, invented to make you feel small. Watch. I am breaking these rules, and nothing will happen to me because I am stronger. This is not a blunder. This is calculated political theater. And now for the second act of this theater, the episode where Trump leaves Charles behind to speak with a guardsman. In the world of protocol, this is arguably an even more serious breach. The monarch is the center of gravity around which all others orbit. By leaving him behind, Trump changes this geometry of power. He himself becomes the sun, and Charles is relegated to a planet in his orbit. And his choice of conversation partner, the guardsman, is brilliant in its cynicism. The guardsman is a symbol of power, the muscle of the monarchy. By addressing him over the prince's head, Trump sends another signal. I don't need your symbolic authority. I speak directly to your real power. This is the reduction of Charles to the level of a prop. He wasn't just pushed aside. He was declared a non-essential element of the system. And all this happens in front of his own guards. It is an act of symbolic insubordination, a demonstration that the old hierarchy no longer works. And once again, Charles can do nothing. He cannot call out, cannot demand attention. Because the moment power has to assert itself, it ceases to be power. On that day in Windsor, the real power belonged to the one who could afford to ignore the rules. The power belonged to the one who touched the untouchable. Now let's try to do what is forbidden by any protocol. Look inside Charles's mind during those few seconds. One can only guess what he felt. Imagine a man who, from the cradle, was trained not to be himself, but to perform a role. Decades of training aimed at suppressing personal impulses in the name of function. His body is an instrument that doesn't fully belong to him. And into this perfectly calibrated system, a crude external factor intrudes. A warm, heavy, foreign hand on his back. What happens in his mind? The first thing, probably, is a system failure, a short circuit. Something has happened that was not supposed to happen. The brain, trained to recognize the slightest deviation from the norm, sends an alarm signal. Then, perhaps, comes a wave of cold humiliation. Not as a prince, but as a man. His personal space, which in his case is also Sedat space, has been grossly violated. This gesture is not friendly. It is a gesture of dominance. As if a claim has been laid on him like an object, and following that most likely is a dull, impotent rage. The fury of an aristocrat insulted by an upstart. But this anger is doomed to remain internal. Any external reaction, recoiling, making a comment, would have been a catastrophe. It would have meant admitting that he was affected. It would have meant lowering himself to his opponent's level and entering a game on his field by his rules, the rules of a street brawl. And in that game, Charles is destined to lose. His only weapon is impeccable composure, an icy calm, a forced smile. And he uses it. He smiles. And in that smile lies the entire drama of the old world trying to maintain its dignity under the onslaught of a new brazen force. And then comes the second blow. He is left behind. He is forced to scurry behind Trump, who is now the center of attention. At that moment, Charles must feel invisible, a shadow in his own castle. His entire life, all his preparation, all this complex ritual, it all proved powerless against simple audacity. He is a priest in a temple that a barbarian has broken into, demonstratively ignoring the altar. And he must pretend that everything is fine, because to acknowledge the desecration is to admit that the temple is no longer a sanctuary. Walking behind Trump, he may have, for the first time, truly understood the fragility of his world. In those moments, Trump stripped him of a part of his royal majesty without even touching the crown. He simply showed that it was just a prop. And the hardest thing for Charles was not what Trump did. It was that he, Charles, could do nothing about it. That moment, that pat on the back, will forever remain in his memory as a reminder that the world has changed and its rules are no longer universal. And now let's look at the scene from another angle. Let's try to see it through Donald Trump's eyes. To do this, we need to switch off all our notions of history and etiquette. You are Trump. You are at Windsor. You don't see the cradle of a monarchy. You see a prime piece of real estate. You assess its market value, its tourist potential, its brand. The people in strange hats are not, for you, guardians of tradition, but expensive yet impressive service staff. Charles is not a future king. He is the head of an old family business that hasn't turned a profit in a long time, but has kept its famous name. He is a counterparty, and your main task in any communication is to establish a hierarchy in your favor. How do you do that? Through body language, through control of space, through touch. It's your instinct, your nature. For him, a pat on the back is not an insult. In his world, it can be a sign of favor, a way of saying, relax, pal, we're on the same wavelength, though, but remember who's in charge here. He transfers the code of conduct from the world of business and showmanship to the world of diplomacy, seeing no difference between them. In his operating system, there is no concept of should not, only can and cannot. And he knows he can. He sees that this whole complex system of protocol is utterly defenseless against direct action. It's like pitting an origami master against a bulldozer. The master can create amazing things from paper, but the bulldozer will simply not notice him. Trump is that bulldozer. He doesn't think in terms of insulting the monarchy. He thinks in terms of an impressive photo op and a demonstration of strength. Talking to a guardsman while ignoring the prince? In his logic, it's a perfect move. A strong leader speaks to a strong soldier. It's an image that sells perfectly to his audience. And the prince? Well, he can wait. He's part of the scenery. Trump doesn't destroy the old world consciously. He simply doesn't take it seriously. He is so immersed in his own reality, which consists of winners and losers, that all these ancient institutions are for him just a fog that he dispels with a single wave of his hand. And therein lies his main strength and the source of terror for his opponents. He does not fight the system. He acts as if it doesn't exist. And for a system, there's nothing more terrifying than being ignored. It proves that it no longer has real power. Now let's look at what began after the cameras were turned off, because the most interesting part unfolded in the media space. It turned out that the gesture itself no longer mattered. All that mattered was how it was used. The very second Trump's hand touched Charles's back, reality fractured into a multitude of interpretations, and everyone turned this episode into a weapon in their own information war. The British tabloids exploded with headlines: desecration, an insult to the nation, Yankee barbarian humiliates our prince. For them, it was the perfect excuse to stoke nationalist feelings, defend their sacred institution, and sell newspapers. They turned an awkward moment into a summer national drama. Switch over to American conservative channels. There, we see a completely different picture. Donald Trump is not a lout, but an authentic leader, a regular guy who is not constrained by hypocritical European conventions. His gesture is a sign of the special relationship, of friendly warmth. And all who are outraged are snobs and globalists who hate their president. They showed the same footage, but their commentary transformed it into a story of how a simple American showed arrogant aristocrats what sincerity looks like. And what about the liberal media in the US? They used the episode as yet more proof that Trump is a national disgrace. Incompetent, uncouth, a bull in a china shop. Their goal was not to defend the British monarchy, but to attack their political enemy. And what is remarkable in this whole story is this: the incident itself, its real meaning, the clash of two worlds, was drowned in this flood of propaganda. It ceased to be an event and became merely a pretext. Millions of people around the world consumed a ready-made emotion that was offered to them: righteous anger, pride in their leader, or shame for him. Their opinions were manipulated using the very same video clip. This is one of the most unpleasant truths of our time. Events in themselves no longer mean anything. All that matters is their interpretation, and he who controls the interpretation controls reality. On that day at Windsor, we saw not just a pat on the back. We saw history being fabricated in real time, right before our eyes. This episode is not an accident or an anomaly. It is a stark symptom of a profound process underway in the Western world. It is a clash of two types of legitimacy. Charles's legitimacy is traditional. It is irrational. It rests on the belief that the past has value, that blood and heritage mean something. It is a world where status is conferred by birth, a world of hierarchy, ritual, and continuity. Its strength lies in its antiquity, in a sense of immutability. Trump's legitimacy is that of a new type of charismatic leader. It has no relation to the past. It is based on a direct emotional connection with the masses, bypassing all traditional institutions, parties, parliaments, courts. It is, by its nature, anti-elitist and anti-intellectual. Its fuel is anger and resentment. Such a leader draws strength not from respect for the past, but from its repudiation. He says, "All of history before me was a deception by the elites. I have come to break it all." And so these two worlds meet. And the world of tradition proves to be completely defenseless. Why? Because its power is held together by a common agreement to play by the rules, and the new type of leader simply refuses to play. He flips over the chessboard, and it turns out that his opponent has no response to this move. This isn't just a story about Trump and Charles. It's a story of how a complex argument loses to a loud slogan, of how a carefully built reputation is destroyed by a single viral meme. It's a story of how a world of nuance and compromise retreats before the onslaught of a primitive but understandable and loud force. History has seen such moments before. Recall late Rome, where centuries of respect for the Senate and the law were swept away by demagogues who appealed directly to the mob and the legions. They too ignored protocol, because protocol was the power of the old elites. Trump's act is a historical marker, a sign that one era is giving way to another. An era where the right to rule is granted not by birth or knowledge, but by the ability to manipulate the emotions of the masses through new media. And the most disturbing thing is that we, watching this, turn this tectonic shift into entertainment, into just another news item. We fail to notice that on the lawn of Windsor Castle, a scene from our own future was being enacted. So, what is the outcome? What are the consequences of this seemingly insignificant gesture? What remains is not just an unpleasant aftertaste. What remains is a crack in the foundation. For Charles, it probably became a personal reminder of the limits of his power. His entire world is built on the idea of his own exceptionalism. And this gesture showed him, and the whole world, that his exceptionalism is conditional. Power is not the crown. It is the belief of others in your power. Trump sowed doubt in that belief. He showed that the king is not so untouchable after all. And this worm of doubt has now taken up permanent residence in the heart of the institution. It's like a virus that enters a system. It doesn't kill it immediately, but it slowly corrodes it from within. The monarchy, like any system based on symbols, is sustained by mystique, by the sense of something higher. With his gesture, Trump performed an act of demystification. He tore away the veils. He showed that behind all the pomp, there is an ordinary, vulnerable man. And if one can treat him this way, what stops one from treating anyone that way? If one can ignore 1,000-year-old protocol, why can't one ignore the law, the Constitution, any other norm? Trump's gesture was a signal to all destroyers around the world. Look, it can be done. The rules that seemed unshakable are, in fact, just a convention. It's like the first crack in a dam. At first thin, almost invisible. But the water has already found a path, and now it will chip away, widen, and press, until one day the entire structure weakens. What happened at Windsor was a rehearsal for the future, a future where there are no authorities except brute force and media popularity, a future where respect for history is considered a weakness. And Charles, perhaps, understood this better than anyone. He may have seen in this episode not just a personal insult, but a premonition that the crown he had waited for his entire life might turn out to be not a symbol of power, but a relic of a bygone era. And now we come to the main point. Why does this story, this small episode, affect us so deeply? Why does it cause such an internal discomfort? Probably because we subconsciously understand this is not about them. This is about us. In this story, Windsor Castle is a metaphor for any ordered world. It is a metaphor for our own lives, built on unwritten rules, on norms, on the belief that there is a right and a wrong. Our world is also a system of protocols. We believe in contracts, in laws, in institutions, in good manners. We believe that if everyone plays by these rules, the system will be stable. And Donald Trump, in this story, is the embodiment of a force that invades our ordered world and declares all our rules optional. He is the driver who uses the shoulder lane because it's faster for him. He is the boss who violates all ethical norms for profit. He is the force that recognizes no rules other than the right of the strong. And we, watching Charles's silent humiliation, feel his powerlessness as our own. Each of us has been in his shoes at least once. When faced with injustice, with boorishness, with a system against which we are powerless, we too have stood there, saving face, unable to do anything because the power was not on our side. We were playing by the rules, while our opponent simply swept the pieces off the board. This frame from Windsor is a mirror reflecting the primary fear of modern man, the fear that our entire civilization, all our culture and morality, is just a thin layer of varnish over savage instincts. And all it takes is for someone with enough audacity to scrape that varnish off for our whole construct to prove terrifyingly fragile. We thought the barbarians would come with swords. It turns out they come in expensive suits and with millions of followers. They don't burn down our institutions. They simply show their irrelevance. And the most disturbing thing in this story is not what happened to... It's that the logic behind that gesture is becoming the norm. A logic in which nothing is unacceptable if it leads to victory. So look at that frame one more time. It is not just a chronicle. It is a warning. And the question it silently asks is addressed to each of us. What will you do when someone decides to pat on the back the very thing you hold to be inviolable?